Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
There's a new biography by the great Nathan Morley, friend of the show. Delighted to say that Nathan joins me live on the line now. Nathan, good morning to you, sir.
Hey, Giles, how are we doing, buddy?
Not too bad, thank you. Another day in paradise, but what are you going to do? For those who don't know, explain a little bit about yourself.
Well, it's a short story, really. I'm a journalist by profession, and but in the past 10 years or so, I was commissioned about 10 years ago to write a biography, and one came after another. You know how these things happen.
Yeah.
One book did quite well, and then here we are, 5 or 6 books down the line, and the latest one, you just mentioned, and rudely cut off Rod Stewart for, was Kenneth More.
Yes, indeed. Now Kenneth More is an actor. They don't make him like Kenneth More anymore, do they? Let's face it.
No, you're right, they don't. And, this is my fascination with it. It's like I really have a respect for these British actors, not just British, mainly British, so actors from the 40s and 50s, because they just had this aura, this magnetism where you can watch them. Here we are, 70 years later, and they are still as magnetic and as gripping as they ever were. And many of them, I don't think, we all know the face of Kenneth More and Jack Hawkins and people like that, but, actually getting a solid biography of them in an age, as you know, where we have non-stop oldies movie channels, beaming in everywhere, is quite a challenge. So the Kenneth More book, I was astounded how many people were interested in it.
It's interesting you mentioned Jack Hawkins, and because I will always associate those two because they're a very British sort of almost sort of pre-60s, but they've served, they've been in the war, and it's a very British, and to a certain extent Niven, although he tends to be sort of US to Swiss based, but Moore and Hawkins seem to be sort of joined at the hip to that sort of Noel Coward, Cruel Sea, Nights to Remember sort of black and white 50s movie, don't they?
Oh, you're absolutely right. If I hit the nail on the head, they are. These guys, Jack Hawkins and Kenneth More, they served in the war. Hawkins was with ENSA. He was out in Burma and India. Kenneth More was in the Royal Navy. He saw actual action in the Mediterranean, and he was there at the bombing of Liverpool during the Blitz. He was on the Arctic convoys for a while. These are not actors who are acting. They knew the stuff. And that's why when we saw these pictures in the 50s, like I think you just mentioned The Cruel Sea and, all of these great British war films, these were men who had the lived experience. Not, like we see nowadays, the young actors who have barely got out of drama school and are working with CGI. These guys did it. And I think that's part of their appeal, because by the time they became film stars, they had actually lived a full life.
I mean, Kenneth More, sometimes when they have these people playing the quintessential British gentleman or the stoic hero, you find out that they come from mining communities or, they were docker. Kenneth More actually comes from a life of, relative prosperity, doesn't he?
Well, he does. He came from a fairly well-off family, but it is a little bit like a story itself, a film script itself. His dad was a very wealthy man, but was a very careless man and fell on hard times. And the family really did lose their money by the point that Kenneth More was a teenager. So he had to kind of get himself together and find a way to survive. And he ended up going into the theatre, into the Windmill Club in Soho, and to keep a roof over his head. So it was a kind of rags to riches story. And I think by the time the Second World War came in 1939, I think that really saved him because, he was going nowhere fast. And like so many people who went through the Second World War, he was exposed to ENSA, the entertainment organisation, and doing troop shows and, all of that, the kind of entertainment that goes on in the forces world.
Yeah.
So he came out the other side of the war in 1945, ready for a career in show business.
And of course, you can't have 30s theatre going into 40s without mentioning Noel, can you? Because he was creeping the boards. Kenneth gets discovered by Noel Coward, doesn't he? Or bumps into him in the early days.
Well, that's true. Yeah. That's exactly what happened. I mean, what a break is that? Noel Coward at the time was like the greatest theatre star and writer in Britain, and he spots Kenneth More in some little fringe production in London. At the same time, he saw Dirk Bogarde as well, who was also a struggling actor in the same play, and Bernard Lee, who played M in the Bond films. So all of this talent. So Noel Coward took Kenneth More under his wing and kind of gave him a leg up. But I don't think I don't think he really needed it, to be honest with you. I know that's a bit fanciful to say it, because I think he would have made it. He had a lot of charm and a lot of charisma, and that's really apparent from the first exposure he had on the screen. And unlike many of his contemporaries, Kenneth More studied on television, which isn't well known. When the BBC were, in 47, 48, the BBC started to run the television service from Alexandra Palace, which had been closed prior to the war, and Kenneth More was one of their first stars. Well, when I say stars, I mean there were a couple of hundred people watching, because hardly anyone had a TV set. So, Noel Coward gave him a leg up, but I think he would have found his way in the end.
Yeah, I mean, and the films that come out in the sort of late 40s, early 50s. I mean, the black and whites that became. If you were a child in the 70s, as I was growing up, this is Sunday afternoon tea, with a bit of Bamberg cake and a biscuit. But this is, Genevieve. Remember seeing that at school? 39 Steps. Sink the Bismarck. I mean, these are just absolute staples. And if you look at these films now with the knowledge that you have, he's been on the Arctic convoys. Coward is right. I mean, they're not. There is a gritty realism to them. I mean, people go, "Oh, yeah, it was all." And you think of what the Americans are producing at the time. They're doing nothing like this, are they? With their stuff, there's a certain sort of, again, it is a we can pull through sort of aspect to these films, isn't there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head again. This is exactly what makes British cinema so unique in that period from kind of 1948 to, say, 1960. We had these brilliant studios, Ealing Studios in London. We had a great production at Pinewood and at Shepperton. We had independent producers like Hammer, all with this huge talent pool of actors. I mean, I would be here all day listing the cast list, which were going through studios at the time, and gritty realism is the thing. They were making these films on a budget. For the first time, they were going on location to film simply because it was cheaper. So when we got films like The Cruel Sea and Sink the Bismarck, we had Jack Hawkins actually on a ship in the Atlantic. And this is what gives it that edge. And the people who were the extras, the cast, were all ex-Royal Navy men themselves, or ex-Army people themselves. So they knew the drill, they knew the spiel, they knew what they were doing. There was no acting really involved. And that's what makes these, in many ways, a kind of a time capsule, because you're getting the real thing. And I agree with you that Sunday afternoon films, they are brilliant. And I just wrote a piece a few weeks ago for a station called Talking Pictures, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. I
am indeed. That's Mark Kermode's one of his favourite film channels. Oh, yeah, it is an amazing station. And I wrote a piece for there. They have like a station magazine called Intermission. And I was talking with one of the producers there, one of the people who works there, and if we start to list the greatest films of the 50s, we could be here all day and night. I mean, it goes on. They were producing, the studios, over 100, 200 films a year at the height of production. On top of that, there was a new television industry. So, I mean, in comparison to Britain, where we get 1 or 2 films a year now, they were doing 1 or 2 films a day. Yeah, but quite remarkable. Yeah, and the other thing is the power. They're not just churning them out. It's not just like another Roy Rogers. I mean, I must have seen The Cruel Sea at the age of 8. And things still stick with me, like when they have to drop the depth charge for the or they have to. I mean, that sort of thing. Okay, I mean, you could say, well, I'm an impressionable age, but the raw, they don't sugarcoat these films. They don't, and you think about a film like Hell Drivers, for example, so Stanley Baker's film, about these are gritty and they don't show away. And for people who'd actually served, like Kenneth More, then now they'd be having counselling and they'd be talking about their trauma, wouldn't they? But again, it's a generation that very much doesn't.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you mentioned The Cruel Sea and Stanley Baker. You're right. And the part of that grittiness and that kind of real-world lived experience That's the magnetism. That's why these films are brilliant. If you sit on the sofa and The Cruelty is on and you're passing through the living room, you're not going to leave again. You're going to sit there and watch the whole thing.
True.
I mean, nowadays, in this disposable society where everything is so sanitized and conditioned, and dare I say it, I'm politically correct, these films were raw human emotion, and that's I think why they are timeless, and that's why you have these stations like Talking Pictures and TCM Classic Movies enjoying ratings as high as the mainstream networks, because people are discovering Kenneth More and Jack Hawkins and David Tomlinson and all these people as new stars. They're people in their teens and 20s who have never seen this before. It's a revelation, you know.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, for me as a biographer, it's like if I had said this is actually true, if I had tried to do this kind of thing 20 years ago, I would have been kicked out of a publisher's office. They'll say, well, who wants to talk about Jack Hawkins or Kenneth More? You know, their films are hardly shown. But here we are in 2026 in a renaissance where a week doesn't go by where you will not be exposed to Kenneth More, whether he's on Channel 4, Film 4, Talking Pictures, TCM. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's he is now enjoying more exposure than he probably did in 1959.
But the thing is also, he has a like. So, for example, I always live my life pretty much when I'm deciding what to wear in the morning. I always think to myself, what would Niven wear? And that's sort of, so he, and Niven has a career in film, and then in the 50s in the States, he takes on television roles. But it's sort of, he has like a second coming, if you like, as a TV star, right? Same thing happens, but this side of the pond with Kenneth More, because he has should we say he has a colourful personal life? I mean, because he may have been discovered by Noel Coward, but he's got an eye for the ladies. Is that a fair point to say there?
Oh, yeah. It was well known. Kenneth More absolutely had an eye for the ladies. And, I actually do the book is not sensational in that respect, but I do actually talk about the fact, he was a ladies' fan. It's documented. Yeah. He left his wife for Angela Douglas, the actress, this pretty young actress who was, later became a star of the Carry-Ons. I spoke with people like Jane Asher, who when I was doing the book, and Jane Asher worked with Kenneth More, and she was saying the guy always had a twinkle in his eye. You never knew really what he was thinking. Yeah. And this is the thing. Women knew what they would get with Kenneth More. He would flirt. He was a terrible flirt. He probably had more affairs than we will ever know. But the fact is, I don't know whether he would survive in the current climate, if you see what I mean, after the Me Too type thing. I'm not casting aspersions. He probably would. He's a decent guy. But that kind of world he lived in doesn't exist anymore. That kind
a world
of
where hello and ding dong, etc. Those again. It's a chapter that those of us of a certain age can go. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
He reinvents himself through television, and
yes,
all is going well. And then, of course, we have and the parallels with Hawkins as well. Are quite uncanny, aren't they? Because they both suffer terrible sort of not fates, but there are illnesses. Hawkins with his throat, etc. And obviously Kenneth More with Parkinson's. But they show that. And if you were they've been these stoic British stiff upper lip, iceberg characters, but in real life they had to be because of what happened towards the end of their lives.
Oh yeah, this is true, and this is an amazing parallel you're drawing here, because I've written books about both of them. I wrote a Jack Hawkins biography 2 or 3 years ago, and I spoke with the doctors who treated him, and with Kenneth More and his Parkinson's disease, and this was their greatest battle. And they were well prepared for it. But it's sad because they were in their prime. They were young men. Hawkins was in his 50s. Kenneth More was in his late 50s, early 60s when they were diagnosed with these illnesses. And as you say, this is strong stuff. Jack Hawkins got throat cancer, literally had his voice robbed, and Kenneth More got Parkinson's disease and could hardly move. So this was their greatest battle, and you never saw them moaning. They were stoic-type people, and they got on with it. And in a way, you love them more for it. You think, goodness me, to be cut down like that and still be positive and optimistic and pleasant, they still got on with it as best they could. And I think that shines through with both of them. But there is a pattern with this from that generation of film stars. You find a lot of film stars from the 50s did have quite premature deaths, in their 50s, early 60s. And probably that is because of the hygiene and health of the day. And when I say hygiene, I mean things like the excessive alcohol, the 50 cigarettes a day being considered, 50 filterless cigarettes a day being considered normal.
I mean, that's just part of the actors thing, isn't it? I mean, you think about it's a wonder that Harris and O'Toole lived as long as they did, kind of thing as well, because they had to deal with the 60s.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I was talking, when I was doing Jack Hawkins' book, I mean, Jack Hawkins was diagnosed with throat cancer. He had his vocal cords removed, and and Michael Parkinson told me this story, the late Michael Parkinson, and it's in the book.
Yeah.
Jack Hawkins went to London Weekend Television to do an interview. He'd had his throat, his vocal cords removed, and Michael Parkinson walked into the green room, and Jack Hawkins was smoking. and it's another world, know.
But and didn't he have to drink Guinness, Hawkins, so he'd be able to burp and therefore speak? Wasn't that?
Oh wow, yes, that's good as me. You know, your Hawkins. He did because he tried to speak from the gut.
Yeah,
because he didn't have any vocal cords. It didn't work, and it wasn't really useful for his career. But he wanted to try, and he was a trier.
Yeah.
But in the end, his voice was dubbed in mostly everything he did afterwards.
He famously said, didn't he, to Parkinson, "I wish that some fool would invent silent movies." Now, getting back to Moore, when you speak, because thankfully, I know, because with sort of this age generations, it has kind of died out. But we've got people like the lovely Jane Asher, Martin Jarvis. They worked with him, didn't they? So it must be fascinating to talk to them and get, if you like, people who actually. I mean, Jane Asher saying, I had to, watch his hands, etc. But for fellow actors like Martin Jarvis, and he was an actor as well. He wasn't, he was a fascinating character, but also a brilliant actor as well.
Yeah, he was a great actor. You see, Kenneth More, for a long time, I think was a bit of a Marmite character. You liked him or you disliked him. But actually, I think there's been a bit of revision, because most people now actually can see this was a brilliant actor. And if you go back and reevaluate Kenneth More, it wasn't always the gung-ho British hero, happy chappy type thing. I mean, he could really do some incredible drama. I mean, and real tearjerker stuff as well. And I think that shines through in his later work, especially. When you see things like The Comedy Man in 1964. This is when he had lost his big rank contract, and he was forced into, as you mentioned earlier, into television, which actually, funnily enough, gave him more demanding roles. And required more of him, and we see in his career through the 1960s and 70s, even with Father Brown. I mean, he played Father Brown for a couple of years on ITV, and he was superb. I mean, a great actor. But I think this is normal for men who do, as they get older, to actually mature as actors as well. And I think that's what happened with Kenneth More.
People want to sort of like look at, if you were to say top 3 Kenneth More performances, I mean, can you pick? I mean, there are so many. I mean, you've got the Stiff Upper Lip, haven't you? Like I said, Reach for the Sky, Cruel Six, etc. Yeah. But then we see the mellowing, or the taking on these other roles, like the Father Brown ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I was to choose something, Chance of a Lifetime was a film he made in 1949. And he was young and raw, and you could see something in him. He played a factory assistant. Chance of a Lifetime, I think you mentioned Sink the Bismarck earlier. Yeah. That was a real dramatic role, and you see him crying in that. I love it. I love that film because Kenneth More, he basically spends the whole film in an office, but he will keep you there for 2 hours, His segments in the film are superb. And I think, actually, I would say Father Brown as well. I know that I can't remember the guy who does it now. There's a guy who does it now who's very good. But Kenneth More's series was kind of overlooked by a younger generation. I think he was very good in that too.
What are you hoping that people will take from the making of a movie legend, Kenneth More, to reevaluate, or to perhaps you're introducing him to a new audience?
Do you know, Giles, that's what I want to do. Exactly. What you've just said, I want to introduce him to a new audience because, I think we're about the same age, and I think you understand, we were both brought up in the 70s. So we were exposed to Kenneth More as youngsters, but now there are people who are discovering him, just like we did in the 70s and early 80s, and I want them to be introduced to him. So what for me is a thrill is to see people downloading it or buying it at Waterstones or whatever, who actually are discovering him for the first time on telly and then reading about his life. Yes. But I know that for the people who have read it, they've come away with the impression that this was a nice guy, and that's actually what I wanted to do. I didn't want to paint a negative picture, because at the end of the day, when you're interviewing these people and you're putting it together, the impression I got was that Kenneth More was actually the kind of guy who'd like to sit at the pub with for a few hours.
Indeed. You see, this is one of the great things about having a 70s childhood was that there were only 3 channels. There was no internet. Sunday afternoon was quite a long, sort of drawn-out thing if it was raining. And no doubt you would be sat down by a grandparent who'd probably served in the war and they'd sort of sit down and watch this, and this is kind of what it was like.
Yeah, exactly. And I miss it. I miss it.
I don't miss the short trousers, though. The book is called Kenneth More, The Making of a Moody Legend. You can order it. Go to the Talk Radio Europe virtual bookstore. Click on the front cover, and a well-known distribution service will be winging its way to you across the cruel sea. Nathan, you've done this sort of thing before, so if people want to find out more about the books, The Holidays in the Third Reich is a favourite of mine. But where can people find you online?
I'm at nathanmorley.co.uk. That's NathanMorley.co.uk.
Nathan Morley, as always, we'll get you back on soon, no problem at all. But thank you so much for your time today. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, mate, and mind how you go. Good to talk to you.
I always do.